mais on va commencer dès maintenant. Bonjour donc à vous toutes et tous. Est-ce que ça va bien? Est-ce que vous avez passé une bonne journée hier? Wow! Alors, si je comprends bien, vous êtes prêts à poursuivre les discussions et les réflexions. J'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue à ceux qui nous regardent via webdiffusion également. Bonjour. Bienvenue donc à cette deuxième journée du grand rassemblement pour les tout-petits. Aujourd'hui encore, on va avoir un programme bien rempli, bien riche. Il y aura des présentations, des moments d'échange. On aura la participation de personnes inspirantes aussi. Nous recevons ce matin 2 conférenciers internationaux. Le chef Picard va se joindre à nous cet après-midi comme prévu. Et j'ai le plaisir de vous annoncer que le ministre de la Famille, M. Mathieu Lacombe, et la ministre responsable des Affaires autochtones, Mme Sylvie Damour, vont venir nous dire un mot à la fin de la journée. Donc, je vous invite à rester jusqu'au bout pour ce moment. Nous aurons également la fameuse activité Brain Date qu'on a moussée là, depuis 24 heures. Il est important que vous vous joigniez à un groupe avant 11 heures, puisque l'activité commence à 11 heures. Vous pouvez le faire sur la plateforme en ligne si ce n'est déjà fait. Un petit mot d'intendance. Donc, ceux qui sont à l'hôtel Delta, sachez que vous devez libérer votre chambre avant midi et on a libéré une salle pour entreposer vos bagages. Elle se trouve en haut des ascenseurs, en haut des escaliers roulants. Il y aura, c'est ça, un vestiaire. La matinée d'aujourd'hui, elle est consacrée au thème des municipalités et des villes à hauteur d'enfants. Et donc, elle sera composée de 2 conférences internationales et une période d'échange avec vous, la salle. Ces conférences nous sont présentées par le Carrefour d'action municipale Famille. J'invite donc le président du conseil d'administration du Carrefour d'action municipale Famille et maire de Varennes, M. Martin Danfous, à monter sur scène pour présenter nos 2 conférenciers.
Bonjour à tous et bon matin. Welcome everybody. Le Carrefour Action municipale et Famille est très fier de vous présenter cette conférence tant attendue intitulée « Des municipalités et des villes à hauteur d'enfants ». Quel beau titre! Je suis également honoré d'avoir le privilège de vous présenter nos 2 conférenciers, M. Leonardo Yánez et Tim Gill, 2 véritables experts sur le sujet de la petite enfance et des villes adaptées aux enfants. Premier conférencier, M. Leonardo Yánez. M. Yánez est originaire du Venezuela. Il a travaillé au niveau national au sein des ministères de l'Éducation, spécifiquement sur la petite enfance. Il est expert sur le sujet de la petite enfance et détient une grande expérience des partenariats avec les gouvernements locaux et municipaux. Il a par ailleurs vécu au Canada et travaille pour la Fondation Bernard Van Leer depuis 20 ans. La Fondation Bernard Van Leer est une fondation privée qui se focalise sur le développement et le partage de connaissances sur ce qui permet le développement de la petite enfance. Il gère aujourd'hui des programmes en Amérique latine, au Pérou, Brésil et Colombie. Dans sa présentation, M. Yánez démontrera que les villes ont le pouvoir d'agir sur les environnements des familles et peuvent faciliter le rôle des parents et des personnes qui prennent soin des enfants. Notre deuxième conférencier, M. Tim Gill. M. Gill est un chercheur indépendant et un auteur et un conseiller. Il est défenseur de longue date de la planification et de la conception urbaine adaptée aux enfants. Il se concentre sur la nature changeante du jeu et du temps libre des enfants et sur l'évolution de leurs relations avec les personnes et les lieux qui les entourent. Son travail transcende les politiques publiques, l'éducation, la garde d'enfants, la planification, les transports, le design urbain et le jeu. Il est engagé depuis longtemps auprès des universitaires, des praticiens, des décideurs, des médias et du grand public. À l'occasion d'une tournée réalisée récemment, grâce à l'obtention d'une bourse de voyage-études du Weston Churchill Memorial Trust, Tim Gill a étudié comment les villes de Calgary, Gand, Anvers, Fribourg, Oslo, Rotterdam et Vancouver ont pris en compte les enfants dans leur planification. Tim Gill a rencontré des décideurs, des représentants municipaux et des agences partenaires pour en savoir plus sur les efforts de chaque ville pour rendre les rues, les parcs, les espaces publics plus accueillantes pour les enfants et pour faciliter la mobilité des enfants autour de leur quartier. Dans sa présentation, M. Gill viendra expliquer pourquoi il est important de voir la ville à travers les yeux des enfants. Messieurs, it's your turn.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the organizers of the event and the mayor for the presentation, particularly for the interest you have in the work of my foundation. I will try to speak very slowly because I'm very aware of the Spanish accent that I use to speak English. But my French is even worse, so you have to bear with me. So first to say is that Bernard Van Leer is a Dutch foundation and was created in 1949. So you can imagine it's at the same time of the United Nations. So we have a long time working in this field. Our founder thought that big fortunes should be invested in the societies that produce the profit. So for a long time, Bernard Van Leer was investing in social programs in more than almost 70 countries. If we count all the micro-republics in the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean. That was his song in the 50s that thought that if we want to really have the big impact of our investment, we had to focus on early childhood. He was very clear about that. He thought early childhood as a crossroad for many kind of things that somehow defined the development of societies. A few decades after, science proved him right. As you know, and yesterday in the presentation, you say very frequent, is that the first 1,000 days are critical for cognitive, the foundations of cognitive thinking, language, and the pathway for sensory. So you can imagine how important was that he bet on children even before he had science on his side. There are many things, many facts that you also mentioned yesterday about how brain activity is so important, so intense during the first years. Even we can say that the brain of a young child is more active than the brain of a student of philosophy in a postgraduate course. So you can imagine that. And how much important that we use this opportunity to do the best for a good start in life, okay? So the other things that also were mentioned yesterday was the very important role of this connection, this nurturing care between adults and children. So we also took note about that. So after investing more than 50 years in more than 50 countries, we tried to get two big lessons. The big one is that we had to pay attention to the caretaker, the adult with the child. Very often we think about children, we think about the institution, the daycare, where we can put the child, and we forget the importance of the person that is with that child. So we want to focus on that. And the second thing is how we have to pay also attention to the context where those parents and children grow up, live, interact. So that's how we came to this idea that starting early, did I do something wrong there? As always? No. Okay, so, yes, sorry, the screen went off. Okay, so we know that a good start has long impact in health of a child, and also in their capacity to learn, to create opportunities, okay? So we also know that young children are very dependent on adults. Even in the 80s, we tried to count children that were living in the street. There was this hypothesis of having too many kids in the streets of Latin America. And not surprisingly, we couldn't find any child younger than 6 in the streets living alone because they need some adults. Whoever is in there, young children usually have someone taking care of him, of her. So there are few things, usually when we go to, coming from the early childhood community, we know that in every event, we have these debates about the profile of who's taking care of the child, how important that you have the highest qualified people taking care of a child, and we usually forget that some basic things that have to start in the family. So if you want to have a child to develop healthy and smart, the most important thing is that you play, you talk, you show affection, you spend free time with them, quiet times, and you provide good nutrition. So there are some basic things that family can provide. Even I had to say that in my time in Canada, I conducted research comparing professionals in Venezuela and workers in British Columbia, and to my surprise, only 14% of professionals in Venezuela would read to their children before going to bed, and 100% of workers in Canada would read to the children before going to bed. So that was very an eye-opener for us, that we had to do more than we were doing to promote this kind of interaction and reading and storytelling since children are very young. So why we started with this idea of Urban 5? As you know, the World Health Organization says that 95 centimeters is the average height of a 3-year-old kid. Of course, you know that in Latin America we are a bit below, and in the Netherlands, I think they are born 2 meters, so but I don't know, probably. So the sad thing is that not always the place where children and parents live can really facilitate growing. So very often places are so hard that they produce so much toxic stress that it's difficult for parents to give love and difficult for children to play. So we had to change that. So you can see, besides the positive factors in a city, there are some factors that we had to pay attention to. It's about the air quality, the noise pollution, places, access to green places where to be, or quiet places to relax. Usually we think that cities could be better to defeat isolation, but in our cities more and more families are isolated. And probably you're going to hear very often how mothers feel that they stop their social lives when they start raising children. And this complaint had to do that with the new kind of life where you don't find your neighbors usually in the streets, or you don't know even the neighbor next door. And so more people taking care of children are caught of this relationship. And this has an impact on their mental health, but also on the child development. Okay, so these are the kind of things we want to call the attention. So imagine that we can see a city. If you are the mayor, if you are the planner in the city, and you try to see the city below the 95 centimeters of height, and try to see how the city looks and how you could think things different. For instance, if you are standing in a bus stop in New York, you might notice that exhaust in the sidewalks comes very often close to where your children are. So if you were down there, you are the first one to feel it. But the other thing is that the pollution is even harder at that first meter than after that. So the shorter you are, the more you feel it. Okay, so the more you suffer it. I have this one because it's a picture in Madrid for a colleague that also works in the field, and she made this comparison of the city, how it's now and how it could be to promote playing and interactions. So we decided to work on these lines, so a few principles and some focus that I want to share with you. The first thing is what we call urban 5. So the minimum thing we want to do, because we not only work with very wealthy cities like Amsterdam or Tel Aviv, but also very cities with a lot of challenges, like São Paulo, Lima, or Recife. So how can we really say to the leaders of that city that it's important to make changes? So very often they have the constraint of budget. So the first thing is that we think that we had to help people to cross, to create this kind of coordination with different sectors. So the first thing is that we had to use data to make decisions. We had to know how to use it, and we had to cross it across sectors. Education, health also had to talk to finance, to planning, and to urban investment, because we are all interconnected in the thing. The second thing is that the beneficiaries should be part of it. So beneficiaries have to be asked because they see it in a way they suffer it, so they are a very important source of information. The other part is where we want to focus at. The first thing is mobility. How you have access to, if you saw the first picture I showed before with these amazing stairs, sometimes they have more than 300 steps to get up. Imagine a mother with a baby, with a bag, going the 300 steps, like 15, 16 floors, okay? And then she forgot something. She forgot milk, she forgot orange, or whatever. Is she going down again with the baby and the bag? She's alone there, she cannot leave the baby there. Or she just buy junk food or whatever dry thing that she can find at that place. And so we say, is any connection between the infrastructure and nutrition? Maybe they are, so we can find that. So the other thing is public space. How can we upgrade the public place? In many cities, this is possible because they were very planned. But in many of the cities that are growing too fast, and also now with the strain of the fast migration, we are facing situations that we don't control totally. So how can we make sure that there is still public space, that we can make it green, easy, accessible? Okay, so, and finally, there are services. Usually we say services for family and children, but it's more than that. In Lima, we saw that mostly the planners, when they talk about places, they see how people go to work, how people go to the health centers, or how they go to school. But women also go to the market. And then we did this study there, and we found that public space is very used by many people, okay? Women, men, and children. But in slum areas, public space is for men, and women transit. So we had to change that, because if women and children cannot use public space, we are missing something. So how to manage collaboration? For me, the good example is the mayor of Recife. Recife is a city of 1.1 million inhabitants. The metropolitan is like 3 million, but that part of the municipality, as you can see there, he was in an executive program in Harvard, and after that, he called all his secretaries in the government of the city and asked everyone to identify 1 or 2 indicators where their job would affect families with young children. So you see there not only health and education and social services, you see there the architects, engineers, planners, all together thinking about it's a plan for the city for early childhood, because they know this is critical for them. In Istanbul, they try to learn where people live, and this is being done in other cities too. If we want to make decisions, very often we had to decide between 2 scenarios. How can we decide? So we need data. We need to know where more families with young children are and how they are doing. So we can really organize mobility and public space, access to services in a way that really is reachable for them. Okay, so transportation, the first thing, and we saw that in Tel Aviv, is how you navigate the system. Very often also in Rotterdam, there was a very beautiful experiment that we have services, good services in Rotterdam, but not everyone have access or they know that they exist. So how we help people, how we facilitate that people know the city, can navigate and reach the services. Also, we try to see that services for families and children are close to them. Imagine walking with a toddler, 1-year-old. I can make it worse if you have a back and you are pregnant, but you can imagine even you can be the father with a toddler and walking with them through the street to get to any service. And you can see the time it takes. So very often even the traffic lights are not adapted to a toddler. They are adapted to people that can walk fast. So very often the parents had to take bags, kids, and run across the street. So how can we think that different? How can we find the places that probably are more prone to accidents or violent encounters? Very often in our city, particularly in Latin America, this is a big issue, is women don't feel free to walk in the street. In the Netherlands, I can bike from my office to my work, and I see in the forest, in the very green areas, to say desolate areas, and you see women along jogging, safe, they are not afraid. You can do that in Recife or in São Paulo. So why not? Why, if they don't feel safe, can they go out with kids? So one thing is that we can do something to design cities in a better way. I don't say that we have to paint every city. This is an experiment in Bogota, and was painted because the violence there was so huge that we had to call the attention and bring people to be part of the project. And we did this in the south of Bogota, amazing because that was a very violent place, and I asked the president of the community if they met the people up the hill, and they said, no, I don't talk to them, they are thieves and criminals, okay, this kind of prejudice. And I visited again like 3 months ago, and she said, remember you asked me if I knew my neighbors there? Now we are all friends. So what I mean is that there is a change in attitude, also in violence. Our project is called Urban 95, but in that place we couldn't use the name because the main gang is called the Urbanitas. So we had to avoid the same name. So they had to create another name. But the important thing is that by joining and trying to see something to slow down the traffic and to make sure that children have access to the little public space that is available there, it has an impact. It's important to reduce violence. Now I think some members of the gang are helping us with graffitis and facilitating so we can change the mission of the gang. So if we had to use transportation, can we make it comfortable, easy for parents and children? The best is if we can walk to these places. If we cannot do it, how can we change? So transportation is a very an amazing learning opportunity. Doesn't have to be too fancy, it has to be just real. So how can we upgrade public space? Our challenge, at least in Brazil, has been to find it, to find a place. Because we see garbage, we see abandoned lots of terrain. So we need to know, we are partnering now with the National Institute for Statistics and using drones to map the city and then to contrast with the community to see how can we rescue places so we can make these safe places. So the other thing is that we need to make it greener, the place greener. So in some places, even by placing trees, having people to work on that has been easier to make nature, to bring nature closer to homes. And the amazing thing is that sometimes doing this, people see the change because there was one neighbor that said, in the past I had to come here to collect all the garbage that my neighbors jump here. But now I take care of plants. I like this more. So we can change that. But of course, we have to align services, municipal services, to citizen engagement. Okay, it's possible to make of public place, nice places for kids, and also to promote interaction. I remember 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a presentation of the mayor of Bogota, Peñalosa, and he said something that for me is very important. He said, the sidewalks are not relatives of the streets. They are relatives of parks and plazas. So I think that was very interesting that he says that, because he said that very often we think of the sidewalks like we think of streets. But actually, sidewalks should be something more like a plaza, like a green place, so something we can use with children and feel safe. So we can also use a free place for exposition to storytelling, cultural events, and many of our cities do that. Can we take that to those places where families more needed? Yesterday we were mentioning some places, some municipalities in Quebec that are under a lot of stress. Can we move that there too? Can we make this happen there? What we need to do it? So, and the other thing is that we have services, and we very easy think about this, the typical services. For instance, when we think about parks, we think about the typical park. But nobody has made any research to prove that the typical park really gives some opportunity to children for learning. But I leave that because the next presenter probably is going to talk a lot about that, and he knows much more than we do. So I think it's important that we somehow copy this initiative in Boston, the Boston Basics. I don't know if you are familiar with that. It's about saturating with the message about how to interact with children that is positive. So in Boston, they use these 5 messages everywhere, in hairdressing, in a garage, everywhere, to somehow spread the voice of how simple it is to make the best with your child. How by talking, singing, telling story, playing, showing affection, you can do a lot with that brain. So let's do that with services. We have services of health. Children have to go to these services, but also any other services. We can also use metros or buses to spread. So for instance, in São Paulo, copying that idea, they put it on the billboards and also in every bus stop, these messages, because we are starting this campaign. They want everyone to be alert of how much they can do for young children. So I'm just getting to the end. So one thing that we use as a strategy is to scan the world, look for innovation, people that are doing things that are amazing. I didn't want to bring everything there because we could be 2 days just sharing pictures and things. It's amazing what the world is trying to do. But we try to see the leaders that can make this go to scale. Those that have the power and the will to do it. So this is an example of some of them. Some cases, not just individuals. In some cases, there are institutions. Institutions that are around the world giving consultancy to cities, some for free, even self-funding their own consultancy to help mayors and city planners to make this change that can work for the best. Of course, that includes a lot of coordination because it's not creating new budget. I remember the mayor of Tel Aviv, in one presentation, he said, I am a believer in Urban 95, but Urban 95 is not a program, not even a budget of anything. Urban 95 is a way of seeing life. So everything that we do, we had to see how this affects parents with young children. And if we do that, we're going to see that everywhere. So these are the cities we're working. So you can see to your right, the cities are in this moment are working with us. This is how they look in the map. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Leonardo Yánez, for your presentation. J'aimerais vous inviter à noter, à réserver vos questions pour M. Yánez, puisqu'il reviendra sur scène tout à l'heure pour une période de questions-réponses. Et maintenant, j'ai le plaisir d'inviter Tim Gill à venir nous faire son allocution. Monsieur Gill, à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très honoré d'être ici. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much to the hosts and to the people who've been introducing me. Now, I'm very excited. I'm going to be sharing with you some findings from some visits I have made to some cities here in Canada and also in Europe that have really tried hard to become more child-friendly and to make the physical characters of the city better for children and families. You will see a lot of points of contact between the talk you've just heard from Leonardo and mine. When we think about cities, the cities where we live or where we visit, we often see them from this point of view. But as Leonardo reminded us, if we think about children and families, they see cities from this point of view, from the level of the streets, from the level of the parks, the neighborhoods where we live. And I think that's one thing we need to remind ourselves is that families don't really live in cities, they live in neighborhoods. And I'll come back to that. Now, when we're thinking about what it's like to be a child growing up, I think one thing that it's good to do is to think about our own childhoods. We can all, I think, gain insights about children today by thinking about what it was like when we were children. And so I want to share with you now an image that I think brings out an important fact about childhood today. So what I'd like you to do is to look at this map. You can see the map on the screen here. And what this map is showing you is what you might call the roaming range or the home territory of 4 children who are all 8 years old. Now, I know that's a little bit older than the children you're working with, but bear with me. So what you're seeing, this large area in the map, that's the roaming range of an 8-year-old, but this is the great-grandfather in this family. So all of these, this map shows you 4 generations of the same family who lived in the same city, and it maps out their roaming range over the generations. So as I said, this is the roaming range of the great-grandfather in this family. He could travel 10 kilometers across the city on his own. Then you can see these 2 smaller circles. That's the roaming range of the grandfather in this family, and then the mother in this family. And at the age of 8, and then you can see that dot there. That's the roaming range, that's the home territory of the son in this family today, and he's at the age of 8, and he's actually allowed to go to the end of his street. But in fact, this is a British family, and we know that in the UK, most 8-year-old children are not really allowed beyond their own front doors. So what you can see here is what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And I think it's one of the most profound and underexplored changes in children's lives. And it's been happening, as you can see, over 40, 50, 60 years. And this change is happening for children of both genders, from all social and cultural groups, and it's happening around the world. And this is what gets me up out of bed in the mornings, and doing what I do is reflecting on and responding to this change, because I think whatever else has been happening in children's lives for the better, I think that what this represents is a loss, that the loss of children's everyday freedoms is something that we need to respond to. It has an impact not just on children, but on societies as a whole. So I think when you're thinking about the case I'm making here for cities to become more child-friendly, I'm really, in large part, talking about compensating children, trying to find a way to give them back some of the freedoms and experiences that previous generations of children just enjoyed without a second thought. Because I think that that opportunity to have encounters, everyday adventures, to play out of doors, to meet friends, to get to know the neighborhood around us, is one vital ingredient of a good childhood. Now, I've used the phrase child-friendly city. We've heard it before from other speakers. So what does this phrase, what does this term really mean? Often you hear about the term being defined in the way it's defined by UNICEF. And UNICEF has a long-standing program around child-friendly cities, which has a strong emphasis on children's participation in the governance and the decisions of the city. Now, I think those are fine values and goals, and ones that we would all share in this room, I'm sure. But the truth is that this program, which has been running for decades now, has had very little impact on the built form of cities, and that's becoming more widely recognized. So I think we need to have a different take on what child-friendliness means. So here's my answer to the question. It's that if we think about what child-friendly cities or neighborhoods look like, there are really two dimensions. There is one dimension which is about having lots of things to do in a neighborhood, lots of places to play, sport and culture, encounters with nature. So that's, if you like, this axis here. But it's not enough to just have a lot of facilities and spaces in a neighborhood. It's no good if children do not have the freedom to get around, or if families find it difficult to get around their neighborhoods. And this is where this axis comes along. I've called it children's independent mobility, but as Leonardo has reminded us, with young children, we're actually talking about children's dependent mobility as well. And it's only where you have neighborhoods that have both a lot of things to do and it's easy to get around, compact, safe, walkable, that you have a child-friendly neighborhood or a child-friendly city. So that's the model that I'm offering to you as a way to conceptualize, a way to think about the built form of child-friendly cities or neighborhoods. And we've heard this quote. This is a quote that I think nicely encapsulates this idea. And I think we heard it yesterday from Paul Lewis on the panel, that, and this is from the mayor of Bogota, who Leonardo mentioned, who talks about children being an indicator species for cities. And I think that's not just a metaphor. I think it's the truth that if we see in a neighborhood lots of children of different ages, with and without their parents or caregivers, out, active and visible in that neighborhood, then that's a sign of the health of that habitat. In exactly the same way that if you see salmon swimming up a river, you know that that is a sign of the health of that habitat. So if we ask ourselves, why does it matter? What's important? Why does it matter that places should be child-friendly? I think there are, broadly speaking, four answers to that question. There are answers, of course, around children's health and well-being. It is just clear that neighborhoods where children can be outdoors and active and can get around are going to be neighborhoods that support children's health and well-being. I hope it's also clear that child-friendly neighborhoods are sustainable neighborhoods, that we're talking now about neighborhoods that are compact, that are walkable, that have green spaces, where the things that families need and that children want are close to hand. This idea of child-friendliness also matters when we think about community. And I guess I mean partly here this idea of children being an expression and a focus for communities, and children learning what it means to be a member of a community by being active and out and about in their neighborhoods. But I think it's also, if you like, about the broader sense of participation, of democracy, that one of the main ways, as Jane Jacobs wrote 50 years ago, one of the main ways that people learn to be engaged and responsible citizens of cities is, as children, having relationships and experiences and encounters with people with whom they share the city, crucially including people who are not their parents or in their schools or their childcare. And it's that rubbing along that is part of the experiences that nurture a relationship between children and the communities in which they grow up. But the last, I think, important point about thinking about child-friendliness with cities is that cities are incredibly complex organisms. And figuring out how to make cities better, how to make them work better, is one of the most complex public policy challenges. It's been called a wicked problem. And this, my next diagram, I think, gives you some of the ways in which urban planning is a wicked problem. There are basic arguments about values, about politics. There is no one view of what the problem is. There is a lot of resistance to change. And so navigating a way through urban planning, through urban policy, is incredibly complex. And I think that bringing the lens of children and asking about how cities are now for children and how they could be made better for children, it helps us to navigate a way through this complex, wicked problem. Now, I think I've already mentioned the UNICEF approach to thinking about child-friendly cities, and I just want to share that one of the things we know about cities, when we take the time to ask children what they think, to involve them, to seek their views, the answers they give are incredibly common. They're almost universally, wherever you are, whatever the age of children, the answers they give to the questions about their cities, about what they like and what they don't like, you can see in this slide. So one of the things I'm suggesting is maybe it's about time we stopped asking children those questions, and it's about time we did something about it. So that really is why I'm interested in looking at cities that have done something about it. Now, just one more kind of introductory remark here about, if we're thinking about the pieces of the jigsaw that make cities work or make neighborhoods work for children and families, really you can group them into three broad headings. And this is taken from the work of Brent Toderian, who used to be the chief planner in Vancouver and also worked in Calgary. And he really talks about, on the one hand, of course, families need appropriate housing. Need housing that they can afford and housing that has the space and the facilities that they're looking for. And then the second platform, the second ingredient of a family-friendly neighborhood is one that I'm sure many of you in this room are engaged with, is services. Schools, childcare, early childhood, health, facilities and services that are geared for and give support to families. And then the third platform, the third plank of a child-friendly neighborhood is around what I've called the public realm, the streets, the parks, the public spaces that make up a neighborhood. And as you can see, it's that third plank that I'm focusing on here this morning and that I now want to share with you. So I was lucky enough to spend about a week in each of 9 cities to find out what they've been doing to become more child-friendly, to make their public realm better for children and families. Now, these are cities, they're not necessarily cities that you would say are already child-friendly. For instance, Copenhagen is not on this list. Most people would say Copenhagen was one of the most child and family-friendly cities on the planet. But interestingly, Copenhagen hasn't really taken forward an explicit program or initiative around that. We could maybe think about what that tells us later. But I've picked cities that may not be very child-friendly now, but that have invested significant time and resources into becoming more so. So these are cities that have gone beyond pilot programs, experiments, one-off consultations, and tried, again to use Leonardo's term, tried to go to scale, to take a strategic approach. So here are the cities that I visited. You've already heard them listed earlier. And I'm just going to quickly give you a flavour of what's been going on in some of those cities. So in Antwerp, there is a program to take a neighbourhood by neighbourhood approach to make those neighbourhoods work better for children. And what you're looking at here is a kind of what's called a play space web methodology. So the neighbourhood as a whole is reviewed firstly by looking at data on public spaces, but also data on transport, on the pedestrian links, and then interventions are suggested that help improve that neighbourhood to make maybe the public spaces better, but maybe not the public spaces, maybe to tackle a dangerous crossing or to rearrange the traffic circulation to allow children and families to get around easier. So that's what's been happening in Antwerp. In Ghent, not far away, in the same part of Belgium, they're also using that model, but they're doing other programs and initiatives that have been brought together under the umbrella of a child-friendly action plan for the city. And Ghent is well known as a city that's a good place to bring up children. So it's part of the DNA, it's part of the identity of the city of Ghent. So there is very effective links and collaboration between what you might call the youth services, the children and youth department in the city, and other departments. In Rotterdam, not so far away, a different approach has been taken, and the starting point for Rotterdam was there was a survey of Dutch cities in 2006 that showed that Rotterdam was the worst city in the Netherlands to bring up a child. Now, that is not a league table that you want to be at the bottom of. So the decision makers, the politicians in Rotterdam, thought they had to do something about it. They were seeing families leaving the city. And so they drew up really one of the most ambitious programs I've seen, with investment of millions of euros, focusing in large part on making the physical fabric of some target neighbourhoods in the city better for children and families. Turning to Oslo, Oslo had a very interesting initiative, and this is using smartphone technology to recruit children to be spies for their city and focusing on the trip to school. So this app allowed children in real time, as they were travelling to school, to tell the municipality about problems that they were facing. They might be small problems like an overgrown bush that's stopping them from seeing the traffic, or it might be a big problem like speeding cars. And the key thing about this that really takes it beyond just a participation process is that there's a team of highway engineers in Oslo who get this data in real time and who have a budget to make changes. So this team is able to act on the findings from the children, and it also is able to use this app proactively. So if there is a major change happening in a neighbourhood, maybe a new school being built or a new housing development, then this technology allows the highways department to plan and to improve children's ability to get around their neighbourhood. And this is linked to Oslo's strategic goals to reduce the level of traffic in the city and to promote active travel. The next example I'm going to share with you, and another city, is the city of Freiburg in Germany. And what's interesting about Freiburg is there are a number of large new city districts with maybe 10,000 people in them that have been built over the last 20 years that have, I think, high levels of child friendliness. And you can see an image here. This is the district of Vauban, which is well known amongst urban planners and also people interested in urban sustainability. It's a district where there's almost zero car ownership. There's very high levels of public transport and good links into the city. And so any people who live in Vauban who do own a car have to park their car in a big car park at the edge of the development. So the whole of the public space of this district is really available for children and families to use. It's effectively like living in one big urban playground. It's an amazing place to visit. And one of the interesting things about this development is that it was partly influenced by some research in the 1990s in Freiburg that showed that the neighborhoods where children had more everyday freedom were neighborhoods that had lower levels of traffic and well-connected patterns of green public space. So that's a flavor of the kind of initiatives that I was looking at in my... Oh, I'm sorry, one more. This a couple here. This is... oh, this is interesting. I've got... You can choose. You have New Westminster on your left, and you have Vancouver on your right. Oh. Okay. This is going to be fun. I'm going to look over in that direction now, and I'm going to point you to New Westminster, one of the urban areas in the greater Vancouver area that, rather like Rotterdam, wanted to keep families in the city, and so was investing time and resources in becoming more child-friendly in order to keep families, because what they were finding was that when families were becoming school age, when the children of families were entering the school age, they were leaving that part of the city. Good. This is this is my first diagram. I'm an ex-mathematician. I like diagrams. I think they help us picture what's going on. And what you can see here is what you might call the rationale. Why was it that these cities were doing what they were doing? And you can see a cluster of topics that the decision makers were telling me about why they were investing time and money in becoming more child-friendly. So one cluster was around what you might call children's rights and children's well-being, a direct concern with what it was like for children. But that was not by any means the only focus. And there was a significant group of cities that were actually interested in the economy of the city and the city's demography, the changing patterns of families living in the city. And then there was a third cluster around sustainability, around that link that I've talked about between cities being more child-friendly and being more sustainable. So now my next two slides are not going to win any prizes in the PowerPoint presentation slide of the year competition, but I just want to show you some of the data and some of the information that I've been gathering, and it will also be, as it were, on the record for people to look at later. So I partly looked at the kind of what was the municipal resources, the officer time, the money that was being devoted to these different types of programs. You can see that there. And I also tried to boil down the kind of key ingredients that made up the initiatives in each of these 9 cities. And I'll come back to this later when I share with you my second diagram. But before I do that, I'm going to just give you a flavor of, if you like, what physical changes were happening in these different cities as a result of these child-friendly urban planning and design initiatives. And again, you'll see many points of contact with what Leonardo was talking about earlier. So, we saw some examples of improvements in public spaces, play spaces, sports facilities in different parts of the city. I should say that when I was traveling to my European cities, it was early February, and the average temperature was about -5 degrees. And I know you're used to that here in Canada, but in mainland Europe, this this is pretty cold. We called this the beast from the east. And so you don't see a whole lot of children or families using some of these spaces. But I can tell you, these are significant investments, and they're valued by families. So this was in Antwerp. In Ghent, there was quite a large disadvantaged area in Ghent that was the focus of a major regeneration program with millions of euros. And because of the Child-Friendly Cities program, there was, if you like, a child-friendly layer was added to this regeneration program. So we saw streets being made over, not unlike the street in the diagram that Leonardo showed. We saw new public spaces, and again, an attempt to create a network, a patchwork of offers in the public realm of this part of the city of Ghent. In Vancouver, one of the interesting initiatives was around cycle infrastructure. And there what we saw was a shift towards what's called all-age and ability cycle infrastructure. So the idea here is that it's not just enough to paint some paint on the road and say this is where the bikes will go, but if you really want young children, or indeed older people, to use cycle facilities, you have to do a better job to make them feel safe and to protect cyclists from other road users. So this is an example from the suburbs of Vancouver. And what I like here is you have this road closure here, and because of the road closure, you have a kind of impromptu outdoor play space has appeared where just some local families have put out a basketball net. I guess if it was here in Quebec, it might have been a hockey net, but you get the picture. And in Oslo, I was taken to a part of the city where there was a major housing development and a change in the school arrangements happening. And so using the traffic agent app, the smartphone app that I showed you, the highways people figured out that they needed a brand new path, a footpath, through an area of public woodland to connect a residential area with a lot of children to the school that they would be going to. And you can see that being built as a result. So that's a flavor of the kind of things that I was seeing that was going on in those cities. I also wanted to look at the wider impact. Remember that rationale I was talking about? What did the decision makers think about, and what were they learning about the impact of these initiatives? Now, this is harder. There are not that many cities that have done a good job of gathering data on the impact, I think, of any initiatives, but certainly in this area. But I've got a couple of examples. So here is a quote from the mayor of New Westminster. And what he's saying here is that in most parts of urban Vancouver, the more dense areas, the more urban areas, are seeing families leave. But in New Westminster, the opposite is happening. They're succeeding in persuading families to stay in that part of the Metro Vancouver area. And the other quote I'm going to share with you is actually from a national researcher in Norway who's looking at questions around child-friendliness and urban decision-making. And I think this is really interesting. What she's saying is that the politicians who are promoting these arguments can see that, to use her words, thinking about children sugars the pill. It persuades people to think about making changes that they might otherwise be more resistant to. So remember that messy diagram of the wicked problems facing cities. I think this gives you some evidence that thinking about children can help find your way through those wicked problems. So I'm now coming to my second diagram, which, and if there is one slide that I want you to kind of, if you like, put in your pocket and take away with you, it's this one. Because this is my model, my recipe, based on what I found in the cities that I visited. for a child-friendly urban planning and design program. So at the center of this model, you will see a municipal officer. So somebody who is effective, who is engaged, who is able to be the center of the action, and ideally supported by a political champion as well. I didn't see that in all of my cities, but certainly cities like Ghent and New Westminster, there was a very clear strategic political champion for this initiative. And then you can see the other, if you like, 5 key spokes, key ingredients that come together in the programs I was seeing around investment in both spaces and mobility, meaningful engagement with children, so not just a sort of tokenistic exercise, but exercises that are designed to inform policy and to take the agenda forward. As I've already mentioned, a focus on residential neighbourhoods, the neighbourhoods where families live. Good links with transport, planning, parks, departments. And lastly, and as I said, this is probably the area where there is the weakest link in all of this, but some way of measuring the impact of what's happening. So that's my gift to you, to anyone who wants to think about how they might take this forward, how you might take this forward in your city. I just want to give you a flavour of what's been happening in some other cities beyond the cities that I visited, because I think one of the things that's interesting for me as somebody who's been working in this field for about 20 years is that for most of that time I wasn't seeing a lot happening. But just in the last 3 or 4 years, I'm convinced there is significant growth in interest. So here's one example. This is from the city of Barcelona, a big world city that's looking at ways that it can reconfigure the traffic flows through a grid network area of the city to take out through traffic from large parts of that network, and in doing so open up streets and public places. It's called the Superblocks model. You'll find lots about it online. It's currently a pilot, but it's getting a lot of interest. Equally interesting for me is, again, an ambitious program where the mayor of Paris is running a program to turn all of its schoolyards into green public spaces. And that's a pretty ambitious program, as you might imagine. And here, again, the driving force, the rationale is around sustainability. In this case, making the city more resilient to the impact of climate change. Now, Paris is a city where there isn't a lot of green space, where we know that increasing tree cover and ground cover helps to mitigate the impact of rising temperatures. And so if you're looking around Paris, a bit like, again, Leonardo was doing, looking around other cities and trying to figure out what sites are there that are available for improvement, then in Paris, it's the schoolyards. Every neighborhood has schoolyards. And so I'm very interested to see how that policy pans out. And there are some other programs running in other cities as well. I've listed a few of them here. Some of them are cities that Leonardo has mentioned. And by the way, I think that Urban 95 is absolutely one of the programs to watch here. Most of the really cutting-edge, innovative work that's happening in this field is happening as a result of, or has a good relationship to, the Bernard Van Leer Urban 95 program, which I have to say is one of my clients, so just declaring that. Now, I think there's some challenges that we're facing. Maybe when I was talking about Rotterdam earlier, you were thinking, actually, so if you're trying to get more families moving into neighborhoods, how does that change the neighborhood? And one of the paradoxes here is that, and we can see this, that as neighborhoods become more family-friendly and child-friendly, they become more attractive, so more families want to move to them, so you risk a kind of spiral of gentrification that ends up pushing out poorer families, and that's a real challenge. And I don't think we yet have all the answers to that, but it shows you the nature of this wicked problem, and that one of the things we need to look at, of course, is how we manage the supply and the affordability of housing. There are questions around legislation. How do you mandate? Do you need to mandate this stuff? Is there a need for support and impetus at the national level? My studies were kind of neutral on that, but I think it's an important question. I think there are also questions about particular groups of children. On the one hand, teenagers, and this, again, a pattern that you see in many societies where we're quite happy with the idea of younger children being out and about and active in public space, but then there's a curious thing happens about the time when children turn 13, when we suddenly decide that actually we don't really want them around so much. And so you see punitive measures and hostility, and I think that is a challenge. And by the way, I've even seen that in places like the main train station in Copenhagen. At the other end of the age scale, I think we need to know more about what makes cities work for younger children. And the last topic I've mentioned, particularly relevant here in Canada, of course, is climate. And it's all very well for me to speak about children being out and about and active, but if it's -10 and there's 2 feet of snow, particularly if it's snow that's been around for 2 weeks, not the lovely fresh snow that children enjoy, then what does that mean? And the image that you're seeing now, I think, is a really interesting initiative that I saw when I visited Reykjavik. So this is the car park of the city hall in the center of Reykjavik. And when I visited a few years ago, every Friday night, the car park would become a kind of impromptu roller disco venue. So children, in fact anybody who wanted, could come for free into that space and skate with some music. And it was a really vibrant and generous offer from the city. And again, raises some interesting questions about how we can reconfigure not just the physical spaces, but the use of the spaces, and make better use of the facilities we have. So, by way of a recap, I want to kind of share with you some of the lessons and insights I'm taking from my travels. And it's really just to ram home, firstly, the importance of neighborhoods. Secondly, that when we're thinking about child friendliness, we should not just be thinking about islands of public space, play spaces or whatever. We need to think about how to open up neighborhoods as a whole and allow children and families to get around, so play and mobility. We need to look for win-wins, where there are clear links between the problems, the strategic problems cities are already facing, whether they're about demography and economics, or about sustainability, or about public health, and the goal of becoming more child-friendly. I've put here people before policies. I think that this is a strong finding from the cities I visited. I cannot overstate the importance of those individual officers that were the middle of my hub and spoke model. It was something about the ability of those people, their values, but also their effectiveness and their positioning within the municipality to enable things to get done. Policies are important. I'm not saying we ignore policies, but it seemed to me it was getting the right people that really lifted this agenda and took it up and helped to get it to scale and to be strategic. And finally, I'm just throwing a phrase at you that I think might be helpful in conversations with urban planners, with designers, with urban decision makers, which is to talk about a children's infrastructure. It's a phrase that came out of the book that you can see in front of you, a report called Cities Alive, Designing for Urban Childhoods, which just came out last year from the global planning consultancy Arup. Now, Arup, a team of, they have chunky civil engineers. They built the Sydney Opera House. These are people who you have to find a way to speak the language of those built environment professionals that will engage them in thinking about children, because by and large, they're not doing that. So I think that idea of an infrastructure for children threaded into the fabric of a city might be a way to do this. Now, my time is nearly up. But I have one more slide to share with you. And I think what this slide is it's a moment from history, this slide. And this is, it harks to some of the inspirations for child-friendly cities. And many of us in Europe, we look to the Dutch to see how to make cities more child-friendly. And we sometimes think that the Dutch are just naturally a more progressive and child and family-friendly nation. But in fact, that's not true. If you look back to the late 1960s and the early 1970s in Dutch cities like Amsterdam, there were pitched battles taking place about, if you like, whose streets were these streets, who had the right, who had the power in streets and neighborhoods. And so that progressive approach that you see in the Netherlands to urban planning in part has its roots in what you might call a debate about spatial justice, about who has claims to the spaces in the city. And so I hope that when you think about the rationale and why we should be engaged in making cities more child-friendly, and what our city should look like in 5, 10, 20 years' time, that really making them more child-friendly is an answer to that question about spatial justice in the city. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you very much, Tim Gill, for your enriching presentation. I'm going to invite you to stay on stage, and I'm going to invite Mr. Yánez to come and join us. Et pendant que Monsieur Yánez vient sur la scène, on va faire un petit espace ici. Merci à Pierre pour son aide. Deux présentations bien riches en contenu et en inspiration. Donc, on va avoir à peu près une trentaine de minutes pour prendre vos questions, vos réflexions pour nos conférenciers. Évidemment, vous pouvez poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Elles seront traduites, si vous les posez en français, elles seront traduites pour nos conférenciers vers l'anglais. Et évidemment, leurs réponses viendront en anglais et seront traduites dans vos casques d'écoute. Il y a 3 collègues qui sont dans la salle. Isabelle, Maggie, Michel sont dans la salle avec des micros. Et donc, ce qu'il faudrait, c'est simplement que vous leviez la main et on vous apportera le micro pour que vous puissiez poser votre question. Donc, est-ce que quelqu'un veut se lancer, briser la glace? Oui, on a déjà quelqu'un par ici. Si vous posez une question spécifiquement à l'un d'entre eux, s'il vous plaît, le nommer. Et pourquoi pas nous dire votre nom d'entrée de jeu. Merci. Okay.
Merci. Mon nom, c'est Paola Ballesteros de Marigon-Enfort de Laval. Ma question, c'est pour M. Leonardo. Premièrement, félicitations pour le bon travail que vous faites à Latino-Amérique parce que c'est vraiment un besoin qu'il y a là-bas et le fait de voir ça, c'est vraiment quelque chose de gagnant. Félicitations. Donc, ma question, c'est dans un des diapositives, vous avez parlé d'implication citoyenne. Oui. Donc, ça, c'est un élément important. Ma question est, est-ce que dans votre organisme, il y a des stratégies que vous pouvez nous partager pour attirer l'attention des citoyens et pour s'impliquer dans les stratégies, dans les mouvements des initiatives, dans les initiatives. C'est ça ma question. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Shall I start? Okay. Thank you for your question and your comments. In fact, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation doesn't have direct intervention in cities, so we work with partners in cities. And in my experience so far, we have seen plenty of methodology to bring communities to participate. And so in this moment, we are, you can find in our website a toolkit, and we are about to update with some strategies cities are using to get citizens involved. My personal experience in one city in Peru was in a place that was so poor and so stressed that we couldn't really reach adults to engage in the change. And so we found in that place of Peru a movement of organized children. Actually, there was a very controversial case because they were working children, and this is banned by the law. But they were organized, and by being organized, they keep their colleagues at school and they help each other. So we approached them, and they were very diligent agents of change. So we started with them trying to figure out, to evaluate, to run diagnosis of community, to understand what were the main issues. In that place particularly, they have a problem with flooding because it's close to the Amazon. So half of the year, the water is up, and many little kids die because they try to go after their parents. So we tried to see, well, this is not normal. How can we do to change? And we were surprised how effective, how innovative these kids were in finding solutions. Nowadays, 7 years after this first contact, adults are part of the solution because children joined. So I'm willing, if you are interested in sharing somehow, because we are in the website, some kind of ways of involving people in different cities, such as in the Netherlands. We have the history that Tim just showed there, but also in Tel Aviv, how they're using app. They can bring thousands of parents and grandparents to the Levin Plaza for 3 days dedicated to young children, okay, and babies, or to cases like the cases in Colombia, in Bogotá, in Cali, in Iquitos, the city in the Amazon, or Recife and San Paulo, how they use community engagement, different kind of, to make a change happen. So thank you again, gracias for the question. I wish I could speak Spanish, okay, because it's easier for me. Okay, thank you so much.
So did you say that you could share the strategies, the mobilization strategies with us?
Yes.
In the document?
Yes, we can find, we can send it to you, because we're collecting experiences from others. So there are others that are really the experts, and we're trying to collect and put them together so we can share.
Super, thank you. Alors, M. Yánez va pouvoir nous donner des documents qui, en fait, documentent les stratégies de mobilisation et on pourra les partager avec vous tous sur le site du Grand Rassemblement. Alors, on a une question par là.
Hi, we have a question for you. With all this knowledge that you have about cities and everything, we were wondering, because we're from a more rural area in the Gaspé Peninsula, how do we apply this knowledge to a place that is very spread out, has very little access to public transportation, and also winter is omnipresent 4 months a year? So, yeah, that's our question.
That's a really good question, and I realized last night when I'd given my 4th version of the slides that I wanted to say that's another challenge. I think figuring out what this means in rural areas, in small cities, in small municipalities is hard. And I know, I mentioned the researcher from Norway. So Norway is interesting because there is, in fact, a federal law. There is a requirement in Norway for municipalities to involve children in urban planning decisions. And that's been in place for many years. And so there have been studies on how effectively that law has been implemented. And what that shows is that it's not been implemented so well in smaller municipalities. So there's a clear pattern that smaller municipalities report it's harder for them. Now, what that doesn't do is help you answer your question. It just, in a way, validates your question. And I think we need to know more. And there's no denying that in this agenda that a lot of the impetus, a lot of the action is happening in bigger cities for kind of obvious reasons. But I suspect that some of the basic ingredients are going to be the same. So I'm sure you will need somebody within the municipality who takes this as their brief and who runs with it. I suspect there's a place for just some kind of scan to see what's happening in different rural areas, to find out what's current best practice. And I think there may also be a case for pooling resources. So for maybe geographically adjacent areas to come together to literally share their resources, to enable a kind of sufficient level of resource to take action across an area, because any one municipality is just going to struggle to find the resource. But it's certainly a question that we really need more work on.
Soyez pas gênés, allez-y. Ici.
Thank you. So my question is a 2-for-1. So hopefully this will last. So in your experience, have you seen some measures that ensure the equal use of urban spaces for girls specifically, knowing that in unplanned urban spaces, girls are more at risk of violence, harassment, and isolation? And also, in our context, maybe in Montreal and their surroundings, the grandparents are also really more involved in this generation in caretaking of children. So have you seen other measures that include not also child-friendly, but elderly friendly?
Shall I go? Yes, we have, among our partners, we're working with the Tim Gill Institute, and they are developing some tools to evaluate place from the perspective of families with young children. So we're in that process. We're probably going to see it also in the toolkit we are distributing. I had some samples, but in Spanish, because I was using last week in Bogota. But also our partners in São Paulo and Lima are working on that. So that case I mentioned about Lima, trying to evaluate the public space of slum Lima, is in part because it's a very violent area of the city. So you go outside you are in Lima, you are in a very, very developed world, but you just move to the peripheral areas and it's a totally different reality. So we wanted to know if we want women and parents to go out with kids and play in the street, is that responsible, possible? We listen to teams that say children have to take some risk, and we say, how much that risk? So we wanted to know that. So that's why we partnered with the Institute of Statistics, and we used some drones to have some ideas how the use was, when is the best time of life to use it. And we are developing, we are not there yet, but we are working with them to develop some indicators that can be used by the state, by the government, to assess the quality of places and to make decisions about safe routes. We are trying to build what we call the early childhood priority zones, so to start with. So around services that are more frequent by parents with young children, we try to make sure that these areas around those places are safe. So we're using that kind of indicators to get there. Different cities have developed different kind of indicators. We are in this moment disseminating information developed by Young Girl, but we are trying to adapt it to other areas that not necessarily are covered by that. So we are discovering with Bogota, with São Paulo, Recife, other kind of things. I guess in mega cities, the challenge is quite different than the challenge that you might have in Copenhagen or Tel Aviv or The Hague. So mega cities that have more than 2-3 million, the realities are different, and you have to be more, let's say, more strategic about getting information in a safe way, in such a way that you can really make decisions that are appropriate. So I don't know if this responds to your question. Maybe you can add some on the indicators.
I'm going to answer the second question first, and it's really not really an answer about grandparents, but just thinking about what are the links between the issues facing older people and children and young people. And really it's just a signpost. For those of you who don't know, you have an organization, an NGO here in Canada called 880 Cities, that's based in Toronto, that is precisely making that link. So that the name 880 Cities comes from the idea that if a city works well for an 8-year-old and it works well for an 80-year-old, then it will work well for everybody. And I'm sure Leonardo would say, don't forget the 8-month-year-old as well. But 880 Cities is doing some interesting work there. I haven't seen, and would be interested to see, some specific work on intergenerational links in public space. So there is some work going on about intergenerational contact within settings, within institutions. So right now in my country, in the UK, there's a lot of interest in this sort of model where young children are being brought into residential care homes. So actually having regular contact between the oldest generation and the youngest. And that's interesting and fascinating. There's a TV program on about it right now. But I'm more interested in the public space, and I don't know of specific work that explores some of those areas of interest and shared interest, but also possibly some areas of difference and tension between the wishes and needs of children and older people. Now, your first question was about girls. It's certainly true that most of the studies I've seen show, I think, what you're pointing at, which is that girls have less everyday freedom than boys. Their mobility, their freedom is more limited. And I think the short answer to that question is to figure out meaningful ways to engage girls and to bring their voices into decision-making. All I wanted to say is I think that's quite specific to different cultures and contexts, and it's not always the case. So right now in London, my city, there is a big issue about boys and about violence between boys and about that violence having an impact on boys who have nothing to do with gangs or drug dealing, but are just caught in the crossfire. So I was involved in some work in social housing estates in Hackney, speaking to parents, and actually the parents were saying that they thought that the parents of boys were worse served than the parents of girls in terms of public space and opportunities to play in that part of London at that time. So it is quite specific, and it can also change over time, of course, which is another reason why I think engagement, thoughtful engagement, where you're really trying to explore the detailed issues that particular neighbourhoods and particular groups of children and particular families are facing, that is going to help you get towards the answer to that question.
Thank you, Tim. We have a question right here. Non? Est-ce qu'on a une question ailleurs dans la salle?
Bonjour à vous deux. Au Québec, on a développé un projet qui s'appelle « On joue dans la rue ». Je ne sais pas si vous êtes au courant. C'est rendu une loi. Ça a été adopté à l'Assemblée nationale. Et puis, j'en suis fier, c'est moi qui est l'instigateur. Et quand on parle de participation citoyenne, je pense que c'est un très, très bel exemple. Je pense que vous pourriez aussi regarder ce projet-là. Et c'est adaptable à tous les villes, villages et tout ce qu'on peut impliquer comme tel et à des coûts vraiment minimes. Fait que je vous invite à en prendre connaissance.
I have to say that I would love to, because this is the kind of things we're looking for, good examples that can be copied by others to improve the life of children. So it would be nice to accept your invitation.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm on record as being a huge fan of, I think, just the sort of model you're talking about. In the UK, it's called playing out, and it's a model where residents can come together and close the traffic in a street for regular periods. It might be 2 or 3 hours a week. I know in other parts of Europe, it's maybe closing a street to traffic for a week in the summer holidays, but essentially it's municipalities supporting residents to manage and close traffic in ordinary residential streets so that the street can become available for play and for public use. And I'm on record as saying I think it's the best idea, the best practical idea for opening up cities for play that I've seen in the last 20 years. So I'm a big fan. And in my report, I signpost some examples because there are examples from several of the cities that I've mentioned. And also, as I've said, I think there are maybe 50 or 60 municipalities in the UK that have adopted this model, perhaps 500 or 1,000 streets. Right now, there is a pilot playing out program happening in Toronto that's being run by the NGO Earth Day Canada. The model has also been taken up, to my direct knowledge, in Australia. There are links with the Ciclovia movement, which is, I think, probably came from Bogota, which is a slightly different model in that the Ciclovia is, again, it involves closing streets to traffic on a regular basis, but typically, or Ciclovia, maybe that's the better, Ciclovia. It's more of the busy streets, the main streets in a city. So in Bogota, every Sunday morning, 120 kilometers of the strategic streets, the main streets in the city, are closed to vehicle traffic and become a kind of amazing park, a kind of spider's web of parks. And it's an extraordinary spectacle. I've been lucky enough to take part. And it's become, I think, part of the DNA of that city. It's one of the main ways that the ordinary, everyday residents of the city of Bogota build their sense of belonging and their sense of and they get under the skin of the city by experiencing the Ciclovia. So these models, I think, are absolutely amazing ways to get children and families out of doors, to build community, but also to pose questions about spatial justice, about what the space between buildings is for and how it could be used differently.
Just to add the idea of scaling, is that idea of Bogota went viral in Latin America, and for more than 20 years, this has been the case in more capitals in Latin America, so it's a common thing. In the Netherlands, the other thing also happened, that parents get together and they close the streets. Can be also be just for a few hours a day. So like in my neighborhood, the parents with young children, they close the street, it can be just for the peak hours, so nobody cut the traffic there and children can play. So.
We have a question right here, and then one over there.
Oui, bonjour. On remarque souvent dans les villes que les logements sociaux se retrouvent au même endroit. J'aimerais avoir votre opinion là-dessus.
So, let me see if I understand. You're saying that you have different kind of housing in the same place. Poor houses
Social
and very
housing-
healthy houses.
Often, social housing is located all in the same space. So there's not a lot of diversity. There's not no mixed living arrangements.
Yeah.
And she'd like to know what you think of
Yeah,
this.
it seems to me wrong that different social groups in the city have no contact with each other. That seems just, at a very basic level, it seems unhealthy and likely to fuel division. And we know in practice, where are the parts of the city that have the poorer services, the poorer schools, the more rundown public spaces? Those are often the areas of the city that have more disadvantage, often areas where there is high proportions of social housing. But it is part of that wicked problem I was talking about earlier. I'm not an expert on housing, but I think that one of the things we need to do better in cities is to figure out ways to configure housing. But both at the macro level in terms of the location of subsidized housing, but also at the micro level in terms of the design of social housing, to make them work better, not just for the families who live in them, but also for cities as a whole. It's a very lively issue right now in London. In London, we have a phenomenon which is called poor doors. So this is where you might have a large development, housing development being built, and actually it is mixed. So there's a requirement for a certain proportion of social housing. It might be 30% social housing in a development, or subsidized housing. But what happens is the developer just makes all the nice housing with a nice public space and the facilities for the private for sale, and then the poor and social housing is around the back. It's in the least attractive part of the development, and sometimes people don't even have access. The families who live in those blocks don't have access to the public spaces that the other families have. So it's a pretty naked form of economic discrimination. And there's now a growing outcry about that poor doors model, and I think quite rightly so.
On a une question ici.
Bonjour, je suis Paulette Simard-Rancourt, je suis présidente d'une commission scolaire dans le centre du Québec. Et je vous remercie infiniment pour tout ce que vous nous avez présenté jusqu'à maintenant. Ça a été fort précieux, tant en termes de suggestions qu'en termes de recommandations à appliquer. Mais cependant, étant très impliquée au niveau du monde scolaire, je me pose un peu la question, comment il se fait que vous ayez quand même peu fait de référence dans les contacts et les communications et les collaborations possibles ou même nécessaires entre le monde scolaire, peut-être parce que c'est une structure qui n'existe pas dans tous les pays comme telle, c'est certain, mais entre le monde scolaire et le monde municipal. Par exemple, je vous dirais que, et c'est peut-être pas partout le cas, mais dans notre commission scolaire, tous les équipements sportifs dont nous disposons, les lieux physiques dont nous disposons, de même que tous les parcs écoles sont accessibles à toute la population en tout temps, en dehors des heures scolaires. Et de ce fait, lorsqu'il y a amélioration ou rénovation, quelle qu'elle soit, d'un parc école, entre autres, les municipalités collaborent aussi à certaines hauteurs pour qu'on fasse en sorte que tous les équipements soient dans l'intérêt de toute la population. Par ailleurs, j'aimerais ajouter à la question de M. Gill, qui disait qu'il aimerait voir davantage de liens intergénérationnels dans ce qu'on instaure. Je voudrais dire que dans une petite ville où je suis membre d'un comité, entre autres, d'organisation pour l'ensemble des projets à appliquer par le conseil municipal, Nous faisons annuellement un sondage des questionnaires auprès de la population et on demande à tous, incluant à des équipes de jeunes et des maisons de jeunes, de nous présenter leurs projets. Et à ce moment, le comité fait une sélection et ensuite recommande au conseil municipal qui choisit d'appliquer le budget requis sur les projets qui ont été recommandés. Et je vous dirais comme exemple que, entre autres, le projet sur lequel on table le plus présentement, c'est d'assurer que tous les équipements de loisirs et de parcs soient accessibles à toutes les clientèles. Et nous sommes à cette fin en train de chercher, par exemple, des styles de balançoires et d'équipements d'amusement qui soient accessibles à toutes les personnes à mobilité réduite. Et nous avons spécifié que ça incluait tant les poussettes pour enfants que les fauteuils roulants ou tous les styles de marchettes adaptés pour les personnes âgées.
Merci.
Alors, je vous donne ça comme lien, tout simplement, mais je vous remercie d'avance pour les réponses.
Who wants to go first?
So I think there was a question for me in there, or several questions. The question about schools, it is a topic that I look at in my research. I should say that the report of my study tour is not yet out, but it is imminent. I'm just making some revisions right now. One of the challenges, you hinted at it, is that different cities have very different bureaucratic structures. So in some cities, the municipality runs the schools. In some cities, there is a school board that may or may not have the same geographical area as the city. In some municipalities, the schools system is very fragmented. So right now in the UK, I couldn't even begin to explain to you in less than about half an hour the school governance structures. But your basic point, I think, is right, that school facilities should be, and I know here in Canada they typically are, available to the public. And I'm making the case in my report for that to be more widespread. I also know from my contact in Canadian cities that questions about the locations of schools, you know, where schools are located within neighbourhoods, are obviously critical. And I had a big contrast between the approach that I'm told is taken in the city of Vancouver, where, you know, there is a clear commitment for schools to be easily accessible, and indeed I think the figure of within half a mile walking distance was given in every neighbourhood. And the contrast was with Calgary, where there are many neighbourhoods, particularly on the periphery, on the outskirts of Calgary, where children spend their whole, maybe elementary school career, or 3, 4, 5 years, being bused from their own neighbourhoods to schools in other neighbourhoods, maybe an hour or more each way every day, because there are no schools in the neighbourhoods where they live, because the school building programme hasn't kept pace with the growth of the city. So there's a really clear, and I think terrible, impact on children's lives of the failure of that bureaucracy to make sure that that crucial facility is located where children live. I, again, could also talk a long time about design of public space. I think that, in short, the conventional model of the public play area with pieces of manufactured equivalent scattered across a flat piece of ground is a poor model. I'm trying to be polite here. It's not a good use of public money. It doesn't meet the needs and interests of children. They're often straightforwardly ugly, and we could do much better in creating playful public spaces that could be attractive to children of different ages, but also could be attractive places for people of different ages and abilities to spend time. I'm particularly interested in what's sometimes called natural play, bringing in thinking about the way that people of all ages enjoy and value play with natural materials, greenery, naturalistic landforms, some ideas that I have taken from what I see in Denmark and in Germany, and that those kinds of spaces can work well in a kind of non-prescriptive, in a flexible, in an open-ended way for a large range of different user groups. And I would say that's one way to go, and to get really away from that model of saying, oh, we need more bits of kit that we can just, buy from a manufacturer.
Just to
yes.
end, unfortunately, but I would like to hear Mr. Yánez's take on this.
I just wanted to add some reflections about that question that connects to the reflection before. Is that I think that connecting or bringing the schools, so the people in school and the system into this project is important. Very often we think that because it's school, we're not talking about the very young children, so the 0 to 3. But often parents go with the kids to school and they bring their babies, the toddlers, only that not often they are welcome near the school. So maybe it's a contrasting view of the experience that you probably have here of school that is more integrated to community, and other cities, particularly those that are segregated, that's why I connect to the other, when you have these big walls separating the poor and the rich. And so sometimes the look of school, it can be even shocking for many people. When you go to Bogota to a place and you see a big wall like a prison with electric wire around, and you see this is so awful, and you open the door and enter, and it's green, beautiful, child-friendly, and you see what the contrast from outside separation, from inside is a beautiful school. So persuading people to open the walls, to bring down the walls and to open the community is not an easy task. But some people are trying to do it in different ways. In the case of São Paulo, they are presenting to us a project. They want us to partner, that they call it Territorios Educadores. And it's not about just bringing school everywhere, but just to integrate schools and the public space in a way that everyone can use it. It's easy to see in Copenhagen or in The Hague, where they integrate the schoolyard to the public space. It's difficult to see in Latin America. So, but there are some attempts to make a change. And the first thing is how they face the reality that very often has to do with violence and discrimination. I know this applies also to some megacities in the States, where we have also seen the same phenomenon. And I think that the promising thing is are good examples, but it's a lot of tactic, urbanism and architecture that had to come in, so to change people's behavior and make this integration a way of bringing parents and children to school before they are clients of the school. So.
Thank you, Mr. Yánez. Thank you, Tim and Leonardo, for your contributions. Merci à vous pour vos questions. On doit, hélas, s'arrêter ici pour cette discussion parce que on a une activité Brain Date qui nous attend au retour de la pause. Donc, je voulais vous rappeler que si vous avez déjà créé un groupe ou si vous vous êtes joint à un groupe, votre numéro de table va être indiqué sur la plateforme en ligne dans l'onglet Brain Date. Si vous ne vous êtes pas encore joint à une rencontre, vous pouvez le faire en allant sur la plateforme dans la section Galerie où sont listés tous les sujets et vous pouvez donc réserver votre place pour une discussion. Si vous n'avez pas encore de profil Brain Date, je vous invite tout simplement à aller au comptoir Brain Date qui se situe dans la salle à côté et on vous aidera à joindre un groupe. Je vous rappelle aussi qu'il faut libérer les chambres avant midi si ce n'est déjà fait. Et donc, nous allons prendre une pause maintenant jusqu'à 11h. De 11h à midi auront lieu les Brain Dates et à midi, nous allons dîner et nous allons faire comme hier. Donc, si hier, vous avez dîné au Delta, je vous invite à retourner au Delta pour dîner là encore aujourd'hui. Et si vous avez mangé ici, de rester ici pour manger. Et donc, on se retrouve toute la gang en plénière pour l'après-midi, ici même, à 13h30. Donc, bonne discussion et bon appétit.